In April of 2004, Gloria Hunniford's world fell apart with the death of her only daughter, the beautiful Karen Keating, following a 7-year secret battle with cancer. Gloria went on to write a book about her experience entitled Next to You. It was a huge bestseller, and she's just published a follow-up book called Always With You. And I'm delighted to say Gloria Hunniford takes time out to join us on the programme. Good morning to you, Gloria.
Good morning, Patricia. I hope you're well.
I am well. I have to say, your book is just so emotional. I don't think I've ever cried so much reading a book, and you're very brave. I just think the way, and it's so beautifully written as well. You were prompted to write this book because of the letters you received following Karen's death. Tell me a little bit about those letters and the amount of them that you actually received.
Well, I stopped counting at 8,000 because Karen was a much loved girl and presenter in her own right, having done programmes like Blue Peter and working with Richard and Judy and so on. And because nobody knew that she had cancer, it came as such a huge shock, I think, to her followers and also to just generally to the public. I'd say it came like a bolt out of the blue, really, after she died, that I think people felt compelled to write. And people wrote on two levels. They wrote maybe saying, oh, well, I'm the same age as Karen, and I watched, Karen and Blue Peter as I was growing up, and I'm married, and I've got 2 children, and I don't know what I'd do if I had cancer, etc. And then other people wrote maybe identifying with my side of it, saying, well, I too have a great relationship with my daughter, and it's unbearable, and the identity therefore was right across the board. I think that's why maybe we got so many. And of course, at the time, from a mother's point of view, the loss is so deep that I, just temporarily thought, well, nobody else has ever suffered this pain, and you feel very alone. You feel you're the only one who's actually ever suffered this depth of pain. But of course, very quickly I realised I was totally wrong. And all these marvellous letters came in from people who had lost children, not always children, but had big loss in their life. And I slowly began to realise that these people were giving me a bit of a lifeline in order just to get by, because it is a very difficult thing to learn to live with. Like, for example, one of the first letters I received said, I'd like to tell you it'll get better, but it won't, this lady said, because I lost my son 15 years ago, but in time, she said, you will learn to live in and around it. Now, at the time when I read, I'd like to tell you get better, but it won't, it just seemed very harsh, But of course, the lady was right, and that's what happens. You learn in the end to live around the big black hole that I call it, because there's no way you can fill that hole, nor would you want to, because it's your child.
Yeah, because that's the one thing that really comes through page after page in your book. I mean, I think to bury a child for me, it just goes against nature. And page after page in your book, you can see that you never get over it. You learn to live with it. And I felt as the book was progressing, you started to get a bit stronger yourself.
That's right, because we're 4 years down the line now. And I have to tell you, it really is, like if I didn't think this book would help people who have suffered loss of any kind, I would never have embarked on it. But just as Karen, in her diaries, really wanted to write about what she'd learned about cancer over the 7 years, and she also wanted to write about her life in Ireland, growing up, I really, in the first book, finished off what she started. But this book, I felt compelled to write because I felt duty is too strong a word, but I felt that I should really pass on the information that people had been kind enough to give me in order to get by. Like a letter that came in not that long ago said, look, there'll be days when you just want to sit and weep and look at photographs and sit in a dark room. But the reality is that if you wept until the second you died, you're not going to bring her back and you're not going to change anything. Now, again, when you first read it, that's a bit hard on the page, but it's true. So what I do in those days, I try to do something for Karen's Foundation or go off and see my grandchildren or try and do something positive against the negative. And those little nuggets, which I call tools in the toolkit, those little nuggets get you by on different days at different times in different ways.
And the other thing I learned from your book, if you know of somebody who has experienced grief, like the type of grief you're talking about, Gloria, allow them the space to talk about the person that has died and name the person that has died.
Definitely.
I have a very good friend of mine who lost a child a number of years ago, and I always remember her saying that she was in the supermarket one day and seeing somebody who nearly fell into the freezer to avoid coming over and talking to her.
I know. And see, I think that, I'm not being judgmental in any case here, because people deal with grief their own loss in different ways, and also people deal with other people's losses in different ways. But what I can only say from my own experience is it's almost offensive if somebody who knew your daughter, knew well, doesn't actually say anything. Like I remember the husband of a very, very good friend of mine, a well-educated man, and he was in our house, 3 days after Karen died. And when he didn't say anything, and as he was leaving, he said, touched my arm, and he just said, I'm not very good at this sort of thing. And I remember being, in a way, so angry. I turned around and said, you know what, you're an educated man, maybe you should learn. Because the bin men had written me the most beautiful card, and I just thought, so what I'm saying in the end is no matter who is suffering the loss or what the loss is, it is much better to address it, because there's no point thinking to yourself, I wonder will I upset her if I mention it. The reality is that person is already upset. So it is much kinder to say, look, I loved your sister, or I really admired your husband, or mention. How awful would it be if we all did our bit in life and we died and nobody ever mentioned our name?
Absolutely, yeah. And setting up the Karen Keating Foundation in Karen's memory, Gloria, appears to have been a real turning point for you. It gave you a real focus for living, didn't it?
Definitely. And, not everybody would want to do that. And I'm not saying, that is what you have to do. But there are many, many ways in which people can give back. I have found as a generality then when people have gone through conditions, whether it's heart conditions or cancer or, MS, whatever it happens to be, that the family want to give back, because in the main, hospitals, hospices, nurses, they've all been so kind to their nearest and dearest during the illness that they want to do something for other people. And what I felt really compelled to do in this case was, and actually it also came from a letter, I'll tell you about the letter in a second, but I wanted to help cancer patients of all kinds, not just breast cancer that Karen had died from. But I felt that in doing something positive in her name, it was helping me deal with the negativity of her loss. Because sometimes you throw your hands up in her and say, what was all that about? And so therefore, when you're doing something positive and you're helping other people, whether it's your local hospital, hospice, a charity shop, anything really, just going to visit somebody who's not feeling very well, some little putback, I think it's really a positive thing to do, and it strengthens you.
And you got the idea from a letter?
The letter said to me, and this was very profound, some people write the most amazing letters. This lady wrote and said, you have now got to try and find a way of carrying Karen's spirit forward. Because she said, remember, she had a big soul, and the soul is bigger than death, and death is never the end. And she subsequently wrote to me after this latest book, and she said to me, there you are, you see, Karen is still doing her work.
Yeah. Fantastic. And I have to say, like Karen, I have great faith in angels, and I have great belief in angels guiding us and minding us. Are you still finding white feathers?
I do. Recently my husband rang me up and he said to me, did you put a white feather in the post box? I went, sorry? And he said, in the post box. Now, our post box is locked. It's like on the front gate and locked. And I went, no, of course I didn't. And he said, well, I went to get the mail this morning, and he said there's the most beautiful white feather lying in the box. Well, you can't explain those sort of things. And
no.
Some people sort of laugh at the whole white feather idea, but I like to, it's a very comforting feeling. And whereas Karen used to say an isolated white feather, we're not talking about a poor dove that shed 20 of them, but an isolated white feather was the sign of an angel's, was an angel's calling card. I now like to think it's Karen's calling card. So I find them comforting.
Yeah. And you've great contact with Karen's two sons. Your grandchildren appear a great sense of hope and joy to you.
Well, I have to tell you that, some people say, how have you progressed in the last 4 years? And I think that what I now see is so much, of Karen's spirit and her sense of humour and the quirkiness of her character in her two sons. I mean, with Charlie, he has totally her wicked sense of humour. Gabriel definitely got her shopping gene. It went straight through to him. And, in the end, you get great comfort from that as well. And, with the foundation, like Daniel O'Donnell, bless his cotton socks, he's giving us a huge concert in Belfast on the 8th of December in aid of the foundation. So people do such kind things to nurture the foundation. I'm very grateful for it.
Okay, and are you getting good reaction to the second book?
Very good. We very quickly, I don't actually do it for ratings at all, but what you do like to think is that when you write something and put a lot of your soul into it, that it strikes a chord. And at the beginning, we had a number 6 straight away, and then we had a number 2 in the book charts. And but then a lot of the big, it was a very, very big year this year. 800 books were released in one weekend. So you had people like Paul O'Grady and Michael Parkinson and Dawn French. Everybody sort of hit the charts. But anyway, we got there first.